Al Pacino had played every kind of man: murderers, saints, fathers who failed, sons who tried. In 80 years of living and 50 years of working, he had found his way inside more human beings than most people meet in a lifetime. But he had never played this. A man sitting in a television studio under stage lights, trying to say his mother's last words out loud for the first time. The late show that Wednesday had the particular energy of a night that knows it's going to be good. Al Pacino didn't do many interviews anymore. At 83, he chose carefully, appeared rarely, and when he showed up, rooms paid attention. Stephen had been trying to book him for 2 years. When the call finally came that Al would come in, the production team treated the news the way you treat something you've been waiting for long enough that you've stopped being sure it would arrive. He walked out to the kind of standing ovation that isn't prompted. The audience simply rose the way audiences rise for people who have given them something over the course of a lifetime that they can't fully articulate but will never forget. Al acknowledged it with a small nod, not dismissive, just economical. He had never been comfortable with that particular kind of attention. The work, yes, the attention around the work he had always found slightly bewildering. Stephen sat, and for 20 minutes they talked the way two people talk when both of them are paying real attention, about the craft, about 50 years of choices, about what it meant to still be doing this at 83 when most of his contemporaries had either stopped or were doing it differently. Al was sharp, funny, unexpectedly warm. He told a story about a disastrous early audition that had the audience leaning forward with laughter. And then Stephen asked about his mother. It wasn't on the rundown. Stephen had added it himself late, after reading something in an old interview, a single line Al had given in 1975 about his mother leaving when he was 2 years old and his grandparents raising him in the South Bronx. One line 50 years ago. Stephen had circled it and written a question in the margin of his notes and then spent 2 days deciding whether to ask it. He asked it. "Your mother left when you were very young," Stephen said, "and then she came back into your life later. I've always wondered what was that like when she came back." Al was quiet for a moment. Not the pause of someone deciding what to say, the pause of someone deciding how much of the real thing to give. "She came back when I was in my 20s, Al said. "After The Godfather, suddenly she wanted to know me." A slight, complicated smile. "Funny how that works." "Did you let her?" Stephen asked. "Eventually," Al said. "It took time. There was anger. Of course there was anger. You don't abandon a 2-year-old and then walk back in and have everything be fine. That's not how it works." He looked at his hands. "But she was my mother. You only get one." Stephen nodded. "How long did you have with her?" he asked, "after she came back?" 22 years, Al said. "She died in 1993. Subscribe and leave a comment because what Al Pacino said next is something he had never told anyone, not in 50 years of interviews, not once. Stephen waited. Al looked at the audience, then at Stephen, then somewhere that wasn't the studio at all. "The last time I saw her," Al said, "she was in the hospital. This was the end. We knew it was the end. I sat with her for most of the day, and at some point in the afternoon she looked at me and she said something." He stopped. The studio was completely quiet. "She said," Al's voice changed. Something in it shifted the way a foundation shifts, not collapsing but moving, revealing that it had been under pressure for a very long time. "She said, Sonny, I watched you become everything I wasn't brave enough to be, and I need you to know that I'm sorry I wasn't there to see the beginning of it. I'm sorry I missed your beginning." He stopped again. His jaw was tight. His hands, which had been still in his lap, pressed together slowly, the involuntary gesture of someone trying to hold something in that is larger than the space available. "She called me Sonny," Al said. "She was the only person who ever called me that. My grandparents called me Al, everyone called me Al, but she called me Sonny. And when she said it in that hospital room, I was 2 years old again, just for a second. I was the 2-year-old she left, and I was the 83-year-old sitting next to her bed at the same time." Stephen had not moved. His hands were flat on the desk. His expression held nothing performative, just the particular quality of someone who has asked a question and understands that the answer deserves to be received completely. "What did you say to her?" Stephen asked. His voice was barely above the level of the room. Al was quiet for a long moment. "I told her I was glad she missed the beginning," he said, "because the beginning was hard and I wouldn't have wanted her to see it." He paused, and then I told her that the person I became, whatever that is, whatever people see when they watch those movies, that person exists because she left. Because being left by your mother when you're 2 years old either breaks you completely, or it makes you spend the rest of your life trying to understand what it means to be human." He looked at Stephen, I chose the second one. I didn't know I was choosing it, but I did. Stephen stood up. He walked around his desk slowly, without urgency, the way you move when you understand that the moment doesn't need to be rushed, and stopped beside Al's chair. Al looked up at him. She gave you the work, Stephen said quietly, not a question, a recognition. Al held Stephen's gaze for a moment, then nodded once. She gave me the work, he said. I spent 50 years trying to understand abandonment. Every character I ever played who was lost, who was searching, who couldn't find his way back to something, that was me, looking for her, looking for the answer to why she left. He stopped. And then she told me, in a hospital room in 1993, and the answer was the simplest thing: she was scared. She was 20 years old and she was scared, and she made the worst decision of her life, and she spent the next 40 years knowing it. The audience was completely still. Several people were crying, not the polite tears of a moved audience, but the unguarded kind, the kind that arrives when something on a stage says the thing you thought only you carried. She was scared, Al repeated. That's it, no villain, no monster, just a scared 20-year-old who made a choice she couldn't take back. He looked at his hands again. I played so many monsters in my career, and my mother wasn't one. She was just a person who was scared at exactly the wrong moment. Stephen was still standing beside him. He hadn't touched Al's shoulder, hadn't moved to close the physical distance. He was just present, close enough to matter, far enough to give the moment room. Do you forgive her? Stephen asked. Al looked at him with the eyes of a man who has thought about this question for 30 years and arrived, finally, at an answer he can live with. I forgave her in that hospital room, he said, because she asked me to, and because he stopped. His voice had reached the place where it couldn't go further without breaking. He let it break, because she called me Sonny, and nobody else ever did that. And I realized that whatever else she was, whatever she failed at, she was the only person in the world who had that name for me. And when she was gone, that name was going to go with her. He pressed the back of his hand against his eyes for a moment. I didn't want to let her go while I was still angry. I didn't want the last thing between us to be the thing she did when she was 20. Stephen reached out and put his hand on Al's shoulder. Al placed his own hand over Stephen's. They stayed like that for a moment, an 83-year-old man and a man in his 50s, in a television studio, connected by the particular understanding of people who have both learned what it means to lose a parent and keep going anyway. The audience didn't applaud, not yet. They sat in the silence the way you sit in a church, not because anyone told them to, but because the moment had become the kind of space that deserves to be honored before it's broken. After the tapping, Al sat in his dressing room for a long time before leaving. The makeup artist said he didn't say much, just sat, just was. When the episode aired 3 weeks later, the response was immediate. Not the viral kind, the other kind. The slow, deep kind that moves through people privately in the middle of the night when they watch something alone and feel less alone because of it. The messages came from people who had been left, from people who had left and spent years trying to find the words to explain why. From people who had forgiven things they thought were unforgivable, and people who were still trying. From sons and daughters who recognized in Al Pacino's voice the particular sound of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time and had only just found a place to set it down. Al Pacino had played every kind of man. But that night, under the late show lights, he played only himself. A boy from the South Bronx whose mother left when he was 2 and came back when he was famous and died in 1993, calling him Sonny. And it was the best performance of his life, because it wasn't a performance at all. If this story moved you, like this video and subscribe, because some words only a mother can say, and some names only she ever knew to give you.